You just ate. Your stomach is full, and you already know exactly where your next meal is coming from. Now, imagine you have no idea when your next real meal is coming. Not today, maybe not this week. It's late winter, 40,000 years ago, and Nock is staring into an almost empty food store. No fridge, no grocery store, no emergency food bank. Just whatever is left, and it clearly isn't enough. This gap even has a name today. The hungry season, the stretch when stored food finally runs out. Before spring's first green shoot appears, this exact gap has killed more people than any predator ever managed. If your ancestors hadn't found a way through this precise gap, you simply would not exist right now. And the way they survived, it didn't just save their lives. It quietly rewired the human body, including yours. So rewind with Nock, back to the one season everyone assumed was the safe one, autumn. Nock's world back then was overflowing. Fat deer, thick schools of fish, berries weighing down every branch. And Nock did something that looks strange to modern eyes. He ate far more than his body actually needed. That wasn't greed. It was biology, a hidden switch built over millions of years of hunger and feast. In 1962, geneticist James Neel at the University of Michigan finally gave that hidden switch a real name. He called it the Thrifty gene, a body built to store fat fast the moment food became available. Biologists have a clinical name for this exact autumn overeating today: hyperphagia, an appetite switch turned deliberately up. Every extra bite Nock took in autumn wasn't wasted. It was insurance against a season still weeks away. Then versus you today, your body still quietly runs that exact same program, even with a full pantry. That craving for something sweet and heavy on a cold winter night, that instinct is 40,000 years old. Your body isn't broken for wanting comfort food in winter. It's simply remembering something much, much older. But autumn's abundance never lasted long, and Nock knew precisely how many days it needed to somehow last. So before the cold fully arrived, his people packed up and moved, chasing the last of the season. Here's the wild part. Some groups didn't just build shelter. They built entire houses out of frozen storage. At a site called Kostenki, in what is now Russia, people built round huts entirely from mammoth bone. Archaeologist Alexander Pryor from the University of Exeter dated one of these structures to 25,000 years old. Around the hut, deep pits weren't graves. They were freezers packed tight with meat and precious fat. The frozen ground did work no fire ever could. It kept meat edible for months at a time. Then versus you today, that pit was essentially Nock's refrigerator centuries before anyone even imagined electricity existing. Smaller groups without mammoth bone dried their meat instead, slicing it thin so it wouldn't rot in storage. Fat was saved separately, sealed carefully inside skins, the single most precious substance of the entire season. Smart groups never kept all their stored food in one place. A single raid or a hungry bear could end everything. One bad decision, eating too much too soon, could mean starving weeks before spring ever arrived. So every portion, every single day, was measured against a season that absolutely no one could shorten. This wasn't hoarding out of fear. It was math, practiced quietly by every generation that came before Nock. And even with perfect math, the coldest, hungriest stretch of the year was still weeks from being over. By midwinter, the plants Nock's people relied on all summer had vanished, buried under solid, unforgiving ice. So his group did the only thing left. They ate almost nothing but meat day after day after day. In 2021, researchers Dan Zhu and Eric Galbraith discovered this wasn't really a choice. It was a trap. Published in Nature Ecology and Evolution, their study named it the seasonal carnivory bottleneck, and it explains a lot. Short growing seasons forced entire groups on a heavy meat diets, and meat alone could only ever feed so many. This one seasonal gap quietly capped how many people an entire landscape could ever hope to support. Then versus you today, your grocery store erases every single one of these seasonal limits in one short aisle. Even the animals Nock hunted were starving too, leaner, weaker, and much harder to track down each week. A thin winter deer barely had any fat left, and fat, not meat, was truly what kept people alive. Eating only lean meat without any fat can slowly poison the body. Hunters have known this for millennia. So the real hunt wasn't really for meat anymore. It became a desperate hunt for fat itself. Bone marrow, brain fat, anything greasy at all. Nothing even remotely edible was wasted during these weeks. Quick thought, right in the middle of all this, before we get to the hardest part of the year. If your stored food ran out today, how many days do you think you could actually survive? This exact stretch, late winter, just before spring's first growth, has a genuinely brutal nickname among researchers. They call it the starving season, the exact point where stored food and new food both run out completely. When even the fat ran out, people turned to what researchers now call famine foods. Bark, bone broth, anything with calories left. Here's the wild part. Your own bones can still show precisely which years this once happened to you. In the early 1900s, Cambridge anatomist Henry Harris noticed strange, pale lines hidden inside growing children's bones. When a child's body stops growing just to survive hunger, a faint line quietly forms and stays there forever. When food returns and growth resumes, the bone silently records that the body survived and simply kept going. Archaeologists today still read these exact lines in ancient skeletons, counting each hungry season a person once survived. Then versus you today, your body still writes stress into itself, just far more quietly than it used to. Teeth tell a similar story. In 2024, researcher Serene L. Zatari studied 867 teeth from prehistoric children. Published in scientific reports, her team found faint growth stop lines banded clearly across the children's young enamel. Neanderthal children carried this exact stress longer, typically peaking around age 3 and lasting well beyond that. Knox people, the early modern humans, recovered from that same stress noticeably faster, generation after generation after generation. The difference wasn't stronger bodies at all. Researchers believe it was stronger sharing, better food, better cooperation. Because sometimes no amount of stored fat or dried meat was ever actually going to be enough. Around 28,000 years ago, Europe's winters stopped easing off and simply kept getting colder year after year. This freeze had its own name too, the Last Glacial Maximum, the coldest stretch of the entire Ice Age. In 2024, researcher Hannes Rathmann at the Senckenberg Center in Tübingen traced exactly what happened next. Published in Science Advances, his team studied ancient teeth belonging to 450 people scattered across the whole continent. Entire communities across Western Europe didn't just struggle through this cold. They disappeared completely, all at once. The people who eventually resettled those same lands had migrated in fresh, arriving from much farther east. It would take many hundreds of years and countless more hungry seasons before those numbers ever recovered. Knox's own line survived this brutal stretch, not because his people were simply the strongest in the cold. They survived because every single strategy stacked together, stored fat, frozen caches, shared food, and each other. No single trick ever got anyone through the starving season alone. It always took everyone together at once. And this is the exact moment your entire existence balanced on the thinnest possible margin imaginable. Spring finally came, the way it always eventually does, even after the hardest stretch imaginable. The first green shoots meant the gap had finally closed. For one more year, his people had made it. That exact relief is still wired into you today, part of why spring just feels lighter, somehow. So the next time winter makes you crave something warm, fatty, and deeply comforting, remember exactly why. You're not weak for wanting it. You're simply carrying the same program that once kept Nock alive. In 2018, epidemiologist L.H. Loomy at Columbia University studied a completely different famine, Amsterdam, the winter of 1944. People who survived that hunger before they were even born carried metabolic changes for decades. Some passed traces to their own children. That's the whole secret. The starving season never really ended. It just quietly moved into your genes. So, how did ancient humans actually survive their starving seasons? Not with one clever trick, but with all of them. Fat stored on purpose. Meat frozen deep in the ground. Food shared before anyone even had to ask. And a body built generation after generation to remember hunger long after the hunger itself was gone. What they had wasn't abundance. It was each other, and it turned out that was enough. Same human, different world. If your body has ever craved comfort on a cold night, tell us below. You are genuinely not alone. Next time, we'll ask an even harder question. What happened when someone in Nock's tribe actually died? Subscribe if you want to keep following Nock and Ash through every single season they somehow survived.